I always thought that my life with Amy was stable. We had been together for 10 years, and at that point, I often asked myself, have we become too familiar with each other? But it never seemed like a bad thing. We had built a strong family together, a house in Austin, jobs we both were proud of, and every evening when we came home, I knew I had a place where I was expected. But somewhere in the last year, I started noticing that Amy was changing. It began with the little things. Her behavior became more distant. She started talking less about her work, and more often than not, she would disappear with her phone in hand. At first, I didn't think much of it. Some of our friends suggested it could just be stress from work or a passing phase, but as more time passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, I came home later than usual and noticed she wasn't in the kitchen. I walked into our bedroom and saw her sitting on the bed, rapidly typing something on her phone. The moment she noticed me, she quickly hid the screen and stood up from the bed. I was a little surprised by her reaction, but I decided not to make a big deal out of it. It was unusual, but not enough to raise any immediate red flags. We continued the evening as usual, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next time I returned from work, I noticed that she quickly slipped into the bedroom without saying a word. I caught her in the act of trying to hide her phone from me, and her eyes were filled with an unmistakable sense of detachment. No matter how much I tried to start a conversation, she brushed me off, as if she didn't hear me at all. I thought it was just stress, and that we needed to spend more time together. But the doubts continued to build inside me. Amy started saying more often that she needed to work late, that it was important for her career. I tried to support her, even offering to help with whatever problems she had, but she dismissed me. From time to time, she began answering questions about her colleagues in strange ways, especially when it came to Alex. I knew Alex well. We had been working together for several years. He was a friendly guy, and I thought everything with him and Amy was fine. We had sat at the same table many times, discussing projects and taking lunch breaks together. We were colleagues, but at times, I felt like our conversations went beyond business and veered into friendly territory. But something in the last few weeks started to worry me. I noticed that Amy was talking to Alex more often, and this time, it wasn't work-related. Soon, I realized that they were communicating not just about work. I tried to ignore it because it seemed too absurd to even think about. I had always considered Alex to be a friend. We had worked together for over 5 years, and it seemed like there had never been a hint of tension between us. We didn't just spend time at work, but often met afterward, talking about everything from politics to personal matters. Alex was a good guy, easy to talk to, always willing to lend a hand. He had always seemed normal to me, but honestly, I couldn't have imagined that he would become part of the problem. It all started with little things. Nothing too serious, nothing that would immediately make me suspect her of cheating. But when you've been with someone for so long, you begin to notice when things aren't quite right. A few moments caught my attention. Amy started answering calls or messages when I was in another room. That had never happened before. She always responded to me face to face, always knowing I was there. I decided not to bother her. Maybe I was just overthinking things. But the feeling didn't go away. And then one day, when I stepped out of the room, leaving her with her phone, I heard her abruptly end a conversation when I returned. She said something quickly and hung up the call. I smiled and jokingly said, "You're hiding from me, aren't you?" But in her eyes, I saw something strange, something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. And at that moment, I knew I had to pay attention. A few days later, I found myself having lunch with Alex, just like always. But this time, I wasn't in my usual state of mind. I couldn't shake the thoughts racing through my head, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. And during our meeting, I noticed strange behavior. We were sitting at the table, discussing a project when he received a message. He looked anxious, read it quickly, and carefully slipped the phone into his pocket. Something about the way he acted sent a wave of tension through me. Normally, we would discuss everything, even personal messages, but this time, it felt different. When I asked him if everything was okay, Alex quickly replied, "Yeah, just work. Nothing important." In that moment, I realized that I could only trust him as much as he allowed me to, but something still gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on, and I decided to start keeping an eye on him. The next thing I noticed was how often Alex and my wife seemed to be meeting up, seemingly for no reason at all. Calls, quick meetings, and casual conversations. I tried not to get involved, but the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger my doubts grew. I started thinking, what if this friendship was something more than I thought? I wasn't sure what to do with the feelings that were building in my mind. Something was clearly off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I kept trying to find a reason to have an honest conversation with Amy, but every time I tried, she seemed to brush me off. Everything felt distant. It was as if she was avoiding honesty in our conversations, more and more often using work, needs, trips, or meetings as excuses. But what happened next forced me to take action. One evening, when I came home later than usual because of work, I was about to enter the bedroom when I noticed the door slightly ajar. This struck me as odd because Amy always made sure to close it. I stopped in my tracks, and I heard her talking to Alex, who was sitting on the edge of the bed. Their voices were quiet, but I could make out a tone that unsettled me. It was that moment, the one where I felt something was wrong. This was more than just friendship. I stood in the hallway, not daring to move or intervene. I could hear them talking quietly, but I couldn't make out the words. I saw Alex lean in close to her, whispering something in her ear, and she laughed. It was her laugh, the one I had always loved, but it sounded strange now, too intimate, too private. When I walked into the room, they immediately stopped talking, and Alex, seeing me, jumped up. He quickly said he had to go and stood up from the bed. Everything felt so awkward and rushed, and I didn't know what to think. But I knew one thing. What I had just seen left no room for doubt. At that moment, I decided I wouldn't let the situation unfold any further. I asked Amy to tell me what was going on. She stayed silent for a few seconds, and then, as if nothing had happened, she casually said that Alex had just stopped by for work, that it was just a regular meeting. But I could see how she avoided making eye contact. She couldn't hide her guilt. I decided that it was time to act. The next day, I set up a little trap. I asked my wife to take the car to drive herself to work while I stayed home. My attention was drawn to her bag sitting on the table, and I decided to check it. I hadn't planned to find anything important, but when I opened it, I felt my stomach twist. Inside the bag, I found several messages from Alex, messages that clearly weren't about work. One said, "You're only missing one thing, and I know you want it," followed by confessions that could hardly be called friendly. Each word cut like a knife. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were all over the place. This wasn't something casual. It wasn't just innocent communication. It was something much more than that. I immediately texted Alex. A short message. "Let's meet." All I wanted was to find out what had really been happening between him and my wife. I needed to know the truth. I didn't know what to expect when I sent the message to Alex. At first, I thought maybe I was overcomplicating things. Maybe I was just letting my mind run wild, and it didn't really matter. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had to know the truth. There was no more room for doubt. I couldn't just sit on the sidelines, not knowing what was going on with my wife and her friend. Alex called me back a couple of hours later. His voice was calm, almost too calm, which made me even more suspicious. He said he was ready to meet. I suggested a place, and soon enough, we agreed to meet at the cafe where we had discussed work matters before. When I got there, he was already sitting at a table in the corner, waiting for me. From the start, I could tell his face was tense, like he had been expecting this meeting. I walked up and sat down across from him. "You wanted to talk? About what?" Alex asked, trying to seem relaxed, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew what was coming. I didn't waste any time. "What's going on between you and Amy?" I asked, not hiding my emotions. The question was direct, and in that moment, when I spoke it, I felt like the world around me froze. I didn't know how he would react, but I knew he couldn't lie to my face. It was too obvious. Alex was quiet for a moment. His gaze shifted to the table, and then he sighed and looked me straight in the eyes. "You know what's between us." "I thought you already figured it out," he said softly, almost unsure of what to say. I wasn't ready for that response, and honestly, his words hit me hard. He didn't try to justify himself or hide the truth. His voice carried an uneasy tone, like he realized he could no longer hide from me. He continued, looking me in the eye. "I didn't want it to happen like this. Amy and I have known each other for a long time, and yes, we had one moment, but it's not what you think." I felt my mouth go dry. My heart skipped a beat, and my vision started to blur. I heard those words, but I couldn't fully grasp what they meant. Deep down, I knew it could be true, but I had held on to hope for something different. But Alex's words left no room for doubt. "You know how much I care about her," he continued, his voice quieter now, like he was regretting what had happened. "We weren't ready for this, but it happened. It was one. Yes, it wasn't just that. But I never wanted to destroy your life." I sat there, unsure of what to say. Everything I was hearing felt unbearable to process. But at some point, I realized I couldn't hide my disappointment and pain anymore. I stood up, placed my hand on the table, and said to him, "You didn't just ruin my life. You ruined trust. And you, Alex, were my friend. You should have cared." I turned to leave. He didn't try to stop me. He knew everything had been said. I walked out of the cafe, and the cold air hit my face as I stepped outside. Inside, everything was turning upside down. Alex's words felt like a knife in my back, but they also opened my eyes to what had been happening in my life. I thought I had everything: a faithful wife, a good friend. But at that moment, I realized I was losing it all, and it was a brutal blow. When I got home, Amy wasn't there. I decided I needed time to process everything. My thoughts felt like a knot stuck in my throat. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew the conversation with her was inevitable. I was ready for it. Thoughts spun in my head like a blender: Alex, her silence, her avoidance, the strange moments when I started to suspect something was wrong but kept closing my eyes to it. I felt everything was falling apart, and now I had to figure out what to do next. I didn't know what to expect when she came back. On the other hand, I was sure I couldn't just ignore all of this anymore. She had to understand that hiding the truth wasn't going to work, that the truth was already on the surface, and I wasn't going to keep living in a lie. Amy came home late that evening. I was sitting in the living room, staring at an empty spot. She stopped at the door, saw me, and her expression immediately became cautious. I noticed how tightly she was gripping her bag, trying to hide her anxiety. There was something in her eyes that made me feel like there was an invisible wall between us. But I knew I had to break it down. "You said you had an important project," I said, trying to speak calmly, but my voice betrayed the despair I felt. "Or were you just hiding something much more serious?" She froze, not answering immediately. I saw her chest rise and fall as she tried to collect herself. You're talking about him again," she finally said. There was no fear in her voice, just exhaustion, as if she already knew this moment would come. "Yes, I'm talking about him again," I said, standing up and walking closer. "I saw you two together. I heard your conversations. Alex isn't just a colleague, not just a friend. Amy, I'm not stupid. You and he, this isn't just a coincidence. And you know it." She remained silent, her gaze lowered. I saw her face pale and her lips tremble. She clearly hadn't expected me to figure it all out, and that was her mistake. I continued, "Did you think you could hide this? Did you think I would keep closing my eyes to what's going on between you two? I can't do that." Amy stood there, her fingers squeezing the bag until they turned white, but she finally raised her head and looked me in the eyes. There was something in her gaze I had never noticed before. I didn't know what it was, but now it was clear. She was acknowledging that everything I had said was true. I didn't want you to find out," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you. All of this, it turned out nothing like we planned. But yes, you're right, Alex. He became close to me. I made a mistake." Everything she said felt like a blow to my heart. But deep down, I knew I had to give her a chance to explain what had really happened and what she was feeling. I couldn't remain in the dark anymore. "How could you?" My voice cracked, and I couldn't hold back the tears that were starting to form in my eyes. "How could you betray me with him? I trusted you, Amy. You were my wife. You were a part of my life. How could you destroy everything we built?" She looked at me, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. "I didn't want this," she said softly. I lost myself. Alex and yes, it was a mistake, but I got confused and didn't know how to get out of it. He was there when I felt alone, when you were consumed by work, when there was a gap between us. He was there, and I couldn't stop. But I don't love him. I still love you. Do you understand? Her words stirred a mix of emotions in me. I didn't know what to think or how to feel. On one hand, I heard her confession, but on the other, how could I forgive such a betrayal? Love wasn't something you could just replace. I was beginning to realize I was facing a difficult road, perhaps one of forgiveness or ending it all. But right now, I needed to understand what would come next. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Amy," I said, my words full of pain. "But I know one thing. If we want to save anything, if we want to be honest with each other, you have to take responsibility for everything that's happened." She nodded, and I saw tears running down her cheeks. It was something I didn't want to see, but in the end, it was what I needed. Her acknowledgement of her mistake didn't make her innocent, but at least now I knew she truly regretted what had happened. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this," she said, her voice full of remorse. "You deserve more than what I gave you. I'm ready to fight for our marriage if you give me a chance." I fell silent. Inside, Emotions were raging, but I knew the decision had to come later. For now, I just stood there, staring at her, not knowing what would happen next. There was genuine regret in her words, but there was also something undefined that made me doubt if trust could ever be restored. I struggled to make a decision because, on one hand, I still loved her, but on the other, I had been deceived. Betrayal felt like a knife in my back, one that was hard to pull out without causing pain. Amy kept sitting there, her eyes filled with tears. She tried to explain how it all happened, how she felt alone, how her relationship with Alex had become something out of control. But all of this sounded like an attempt to justify something that had no justification. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to forgive her. "I don't want to hide anymore," she said, breaking the silence. "I know I destroyed everything we built. But if you'll allow me, I'm ready to work on myself, ready to work on our relationship. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to destroy everything. You're my husband, and I love you." Her words struck me. They sounded sincere, and I believed she truly wanted to change everything. But could I really trust her again? Trust wasn't just about words. It was built over years, and I didn't know if I could rebuild what had been broken. I stood up to think for a moment. My mind was full of thoughts, and I could feel every part of me yearning for an answer. I understood that maybe she really wanted to come back to me, but I also knew that I needed time to figure out how I would live with this. I couldn't just forget what had happened. I knew I needed to take a pause, step back from everything to think about what mattered more to me, trying to repair our marriage or ending it, never giving a chance for trust to heal. "I can't make any decisions right now," I said, walking back to her and sitting beside her. "I need time to think. I can't just forget. You know I can't. You know how deeply this has hurt me, and I don't know if I can live through this." She looked at me, and I could see how much it hurt her to hear these words. But I knew they were the truth. I couldn't pretend everything would go back to how it was before. I needed time to understand if I could forgive her and return to what we once had. "I understand," she said, her voice shaking with tears. "I'm not asking for forgiveness for everything I've done. I know you're right. I destroyed our marriage, and now I need to do everything to earn your trust back. I'm just asking that you give me a chance to show you that I can be different." I remained silent. Her words were sincere, and I believed she was ready to work on herself. But for me, this was a huge step. I couldn't just return to the same situation as if nothing had happened. I was willing to give her a chance, but only if I was sure that both of us were ready to work on it. "I'll think about it, Amy," I finally said. "Give me some time. I can't make a decision right away. I need to figure things out for myself, understand what I want. But I promise you, I won't avoid the conversation. We will talk more. But right now, I need time." Amy nodded, and I could see her holding back tears. She understood that this wouldn't be easy. I knew she was feeling the weight of regret, but I needed to figure out if I could trust her again. Not right away, not in a day, and not even in a month. It would be a long journey, and I needed to understand how I would move forward. She left for another room, leaving me in silence. I needed time to process everything. I stood by the window, watching the darkening sky, trying to grasp what had happened. My life, my family, my marriage, everything had been shaken by this betrayal. But along with that came a strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, I could forgive her. Perhaps we could rebuild what was lost. But there were doubts that wouldn't disappear instantly. I knew that if we decided to stay together, it would require tremendous effort. We would have to learn to trust each other again, and that wouldn't be easy. But on the other hand, I couldn't fathom how simple it would be to just walk away from Amy. I loved her. But loving someone doesn't mean you just forget the hurt. I lay down in bed, but sleep eluded me. Thoughts kept me awake. At some point, it became clear to me that no matter how this ended, I had to move forward. Even if it meant being alone. I was prepared for any outcome, but I knew I had to take this step, one that would lead me to some kind of truth. The next day, I woke up with a heavy heart. I still couldn't shake off the thoughts from our conversation. It was morning, the sun barely peeking through the curtains, but I felt unsettled. I didn't know how to live with this knowledge. How could I live with the fact that everything I thought was solid had been shattered? My marriage, my trust, my friendships, all of it crumbled in an instant. Yet, despite all of this, I understood that life didn't stop. I could sit and wallow in my grief, but I had to do something. I had to make a decision because delaying it any longer was impossible. I walked through the house, feeling how each room reminded me of what I once called home. Now, everything felt different. Every corner reminded me of what I had lost, of how my expectations had crashed into the harsh reality. Amy was still in the house. We'd agreed to give each other time, but I knew we needed to talk. We had to figure out what was happening between us. At some point, I decided to step outside. I just needed to breathe in the fresh air and try to clear my mind. I walked through the park, watching how people around me were living their usual lives, while I felt like I was in some other world. A world where every decision had consequences. I saw a couple walking with their children, an elderly couple holding hands. Everything about it seemed like an ideal I had once dreamed of. But now, I was in a strange space where I didn't know which way to go. My heart ached, but my mind was already searching for a way out. I decided I couldn't continue living in uncertainty. I had to make a decision, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. I understood that forgiveness wasn't just about words. It was action, a daily choice, and if I decided to move forward with Amy, I had to be ready to work on myself, just like she had to. But if I decided I couldn't forgive her, then I would have to tear this person out of my life. I returned home and walked into the room where Amy was sitting on the couch. She was in the same position as the day before, waiting for me to make a decision. And now, I felt like the moment had come. I couldn't put it off any longer. I sat down next to her. "We need to talk," I said, trying to speak calmly, but feeling a storm raging inside: pain, disappointment, and fear. "I've been thinking about everything, Amy. I've been thinking about what I want from our life, what I want from you. And I need to understand if we can move forward." She turned to me, her eyes full of both hope and fear. I could see how hard this was for her. She was trying to find the words to convince me that she was ready to change, that she was ready to work on herself, on our relationship. But I knew that words alone weren't enough. "You know I can't undo what's happened," I continued, trying to express my feelings. "I can't forget what happened. But I also understand that forgiveness isn't just forgetting. It's trying to figure out if we can move forward. If you're ready to work on yourself, if you're ready to prove that you've changed, I'm willing to try. But you need to understand that it won't be easy. We both will have to work on ourselves." Amy looked at me, her eyes shining with tears. She nodded, her voice full of determination. "I'm ready. I'll do everything to earn your trust back. I know I messed up, and I'll work on myself, on our relationship. I don't want to lose you." I felt something shift inside me. Time wouldn't bring back what was lost, but I understood that if we wanted to move forward, we both had to be ready to work on it. Maybe we wouldn't be able to restore everything that had been there before, but I believed that if we both tried, we could create something new. A fresh start, a new chapter. Yes, it would be difficult. Yes, we might have to go through many more hard moments, but I was ready to try. "All right," I said, feeling the heavy burden shift slightly. "We'll try. But I have to warn you, I won't hide my feelings. If I feel like I can't handle it, I'll tell you. This will be our journey, and we need to be honest with each other." She nodded again, and for the first time, I saw something change in her gaze. As a couple, we were taking a step toward a new beginning. It was a step full of doubt and pain, but it was a step we could take together. After making the decision to try rebuilding our relationship, Amy and I began working on our marriage. Knowing the road ahead would be tough, we took it one step at a time, slowly working to rebuild trust. However, at some point, I realized that there was still someone lingering in the background: Alex. We no longer spoke about him directly, but his presence was felt in our lives for several weeks. I knew that, no matter what, if he continued to be around, our relationship would never be the same. One evening, when I returned home from work, I saw Amy talking on the phone. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but something in her tone made me uneasy. It was something familiar, an underlying tension, as if she was trying to hide something important. I waited until she finished her call. When she hung up, I walked over to her and, without holding back, asked, "Who were you talking to, Amy?" She hesitated for a moment. Then, as if she had made up her mind to be honest, she looked at me and, with obvious difficulty, said, "It was Alex. He's been trying to reach me. He said he wanted to talk." That moment hit me like a lightning strike. I felt cold sweat on my brow, and inside, something tightened. Alex was once again inserting himself into our lives. He couldn't just leave. He couldn't just disappear like I had hoped. But now, in that moment, I knew this had to stop. He could no longer be part of our world. I looked at Amy, and in her eyes, I saw remorse, but also pain. She understood how hard this was for me. But in that instant, I was full of resolve. Everything I felt told me that this threat had to be removed, once and for all. "Amy," I said, my voice firm, "he will no longer be part of our lives. You need to understand that if we're moving forward, we can't let Alex continue to interfere. It won't be easy for either of us, but we have to do this. She nodded, and it seemed like she was already ready for what I was going to say. We both knew that if we wanted to build something new, he couldn't be around. The next day, I made a decision. I called Alex. It was a difficult choice, but I knew it had to be made. When he answered the phone, I said immediately, "Alex, we no longer want anything to do with you. You need to disappear from our lives, and I hope you understand why." There was a brief silence, and I could hear him exhale, as though he had been expecting this but still wasn't quite happy about it. He said, "I know you're angry, and I'm not going to argue. I just want you to know I wasn't trying to destroy your marriage. But if you've decided I need to go, I'll go." I didn't hear any regret in his voice, no desire to apologize. It was like a farewell without emotion. He was ready to go, and I knew he would disappear. This was his final step. "Yes, you need to go, Alex. We won't be in contact anymore, and I hope you understand that." After that conversation, I never heard from him again. Amy and I didn't discuss him directly, but I knew that he was no longer going to interfere in our lives. Alex was gone from our world, for good. Now, as we continued working on our relationship, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I no longer felt like someone from the outside could destroy what we were trying to rebuild. Alex had been the thing tearing us apart, but now he was gone. It was hard to forget what had happened, but now I could focus on the future, not the past. Amy and I began to carve out a new path for ourselves, and though it wasn't easy, I knew that this chapter of our lives was closed. Alex was no longer part of our story. We were free from him, and that was the first step toward our new beginning.